Hey fam, how y'all doing today? Welcome back to History Highlights with Laney. In this video, we will highlight Red Summer 1919. I'm pretty sure, close to none of us was born during that time.
Red Summer. American servicemen returned from the First World War only to find a new type of violent conflict waiting for them at home. An outbreak of racial violence known as the Red Summer occurred in 1919, an event that affected at least 26 cities across the United States. Racial tensions across the U.S. were exacerbated by the discharge of millions of military personnel back to their homes and domestic lives following the end of the war. Competition for opportunities in post-war America combined with a radically changed social landscape placed whites and blacks in conflict with one another, leading to tragic results. World War I intensified the Great Migration, the mass immigration of African Americans from the rural South to the industrial North and Midwest in hopes of escaping the poverty and discrimination of Jim Crow laws. By the summer of 1919, approximately 500,000 African Americans had resettled in northern cities. In many cases, northern whites, many of them newly arrived immigrants themselves, did not welcome black newcomers. When the war ended, many returned servicemen resented that their vacated jobs had been taken, particularly by African Americans. Black laborers already suffered from a negative reputation in the white working community for their use as low-wage earning strikebreakers or scabs who would keep factories in operation while the employees went on strike. The situation was made worse in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution of 1917. Many whites feared that the return of tens of thousands of black veterans with experience living abroad and, more significantly, having received military training would be unwilling to resubmit to traditional, political, and social subjugation in the United States. Many black leaders encouraged returning servicemen to assert themselves and fight for the dignity and respect they had earned through the military service. W.E.B. Du Bois famously called upon black veterans to not simply return from fighting, but to return fighting. Many black veterans were mistreated and in some cases attacked while in uniform. Lynchings increased from 64 in 1918 to 83 in 1919. Membership in the revived Ku Klux Klan were born after D.W. Griffith's 1915 film The Birth of a Nation skyrocketed into the millions by the early 1920s. Most violent incidents during the Red Summer of 1919 were not initiated by fringe white supremacist terror groups. Ordinary white civilians and veterans, unaffiliated with the Ku Klux Klan or any other racist organization, formed most of the mobs. Many of the dozens of incidents that occurred over the course of the year were made far worse because local, state, and federal officials hesitated in taking action or turned a blind eye to the violence. Racial violence broke out in some of the nation's most populous cities. A 4-day riot in Washington, D.C. began on July 19th when a rumor that black men had assaulted a white woman incited mobs to attack local black neighborhoods and assault random African American individuals on the street. Off-duty sailors and recently discharged Army veterans led the mob. When the local police were overwhelmed by the mayhem, Washington's black community banded together to fight back, arming themselves with bats, clubs, pistols, and knives. Soon, black mobs were attacking white passersby just as indiscriminately as whites did to blacks. In nearby Norfolk, Virginia, a parade celebrating the return of a unit of African American troops from Europe turned into a bloody melee and 2 black servicemen were killed. Ultimately, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson had to order troops to secure the streets. Washington was closely followed by a massive race riot in Chicago. Rioting erupted on July 27th when a black teenager drowned after being hit with stones when he and friends drifted near a de facto whites-only beach. Violent rioting across Chicago's south and west sides and into downtown lasted days. Eventually, the state militia was deployed to restore order. Though records vary, The final Chicago casualty count listed 38 fatalities, 23 black, 15 white, 537 injured, and upwards of 1,000 black families made homeless by the burning and rampant destruction of African American neighborhoods. Likely, the single deadliest incident of the Red Summer occurred in and around Elaine, Arkansas on September 30th and October 1st after a white law officer was killed in a shootout outside a black sharecropper gathering. Governor Charles Burrow ordered 500 Army soldiers from nearby Camp Pike to march on Elaine and put down what was labeled an insurrection among black sharecroppers. Estimates vary as to how many African Americans were killed, but upwards of 200 are believed to have lost their lives. It is impossible to say how many people were killed or injured in the race riots and lynchings of the Red Summer of 1919. Official records for some incidents were poor or never documented. We know that hundreds of people lost their lives, thousands were injured, and many more were forced to flee their homes. Yet one legacy of 1919 was the growing confidence and desire to fight back in the streets, in the courts, and in the voting booth for African American communities across the country. The Red Summer saw black populations fight back aggressively against racial violence and intimidation in ways that were not typical before. The Red Summer of 1919 did not intimidate African Americans into submission as their tormentors had hoped. Instead, African Americans emerged from the violence of that bloody year with a greater sense of shared purpose, identity, and pride, which served as a vital foundation for the civil rights movement to come.
So, there you have it. A little bit of history on Red Summer 1919. Be well, stay safe, and stay in peace, not pieces. Subscribe and hit that bell so you will know every time I upload a video. Word of the year, love, love, love. Love y'all, fam. See you soon.